Yang, an utterly ordinary individual, inexplicably found himself transported to a different realm. The circumstances of this journey are unexplained, but please accept it as the truth. An alert from a system interface tells him that his health has been classified as super hard due to his habitual late-night lifestyle, warning him of a potential premature death. Consequently, he shifts his gaze towards the lower right corner of a mirror nearby. His inspection yields a wealth of detailed information. He learns that the mirror was fixed with an overzealous amount of force, so much so that a gentle push could potentially shatter it. This sparks a revelation in Yang's mind. Whenever he observes an object for an extended duration, he can discern crucial information about it. Intrigued, he decides to test his newfound power by pushing the mirror. However, just as he is about to do so, another man walks into the bathroom. Yang decides to withdraw, leaving the man with a piece of advice to avoid pushing too hard on the mirror's lower right corner. The man, understandably, considers Yang slightly unhinged. Nevertheless, he proceeds to press the mirror anyway, proving himself even more eccentric. Despite Yang's explicit warning, the man pressed the mirror. To add to the increasingly convoluted narrative, Yang then finds himself in a cafe, meeting with the university's idol, who had surprisingly confessed her feelings for him the previous day. To summarize, Yang, our time-traveling, insight-gifted protagonist, now finds himself the object of affection of the most captivating girl in college, who, as it turns out, is a practitioner of the zombification arts. Have you followed all that? Yang studies this girl, Jang, and unearths the truth that she is a 1,000-year-old cultivator of zombies. Due to some undisclosed injuries, she is experiencing intense hunger, a craving specifically for his flesh. Abruptly, Yang sprints back to the safety of the bathroom, a move seemingly intended by the story's author to add an extra layer of complexity to an already complicated manga. Now, the internal system offers him a new option, to run a simulation. This simulation can be activated every half an hour. For each successful simulation, he receives 5 additional somethings. At the beginning of each simulation, he can select up to 3 skills or passive abilities for himself. Without any hesitation, Yang hits yes and is suddenly privy to a vision of his future. It foretells a series of events: being caught in the bathroom, having dinner with Jane, and then being ensnared into a tryst at a love hotel. In the final scene, he sees himself being devoured and killed. Not exactly an ideal night out. For Yang, the decision is obvious. He immediately contacts the police. However, Jang has come looking for him, inquiring about his prolonged absence in the bathroom. Thinking on his feet, Yang tells her that he was so entranced by his own reflection in the mirror that he ended up shattering it. Jang finds his self-obsession off-putting, almost repulsive, and she quickly ushers him back so they can finally have dinner. Yang is simply relieved to be alive. However, upon arriving at the table, things take an even more chilling turn. All the dishes are made from blood. Swiftly, Yang fabricates an excuse, claiming he's too full, and encourages her to enjoy the meal herself. Jane quirks an eyebrow at Yang's peculiar behavior, but she doesn't fuss about it. More food for her. She single-handedly devours half a dozen dishes. After leaving the restaurant, however, Jang isn't satiated. She desires more, specifically his flesh, and suggests they spend the night at a hotel. Yang abruptly remembers the ominous prediction from his system. What to do now? Jang pouts and reiterates her suggestion of heading to a hotel. As much as Yang might be tempted by the allure of a romantic escapade, his desire to remain alive is paramount. He suggests that it's too early for a hotel visit, proposing instead that they take a leisurely stroll around town. Jang has no objections and agrees, leading him into a bustling street teeming with various food vendors. What better way to wrap up dinner than with a second helping? Yang buys as much food as he can, hoping to satiate Jang's hunger and reduce the likelihood of him becoming her next meal. He continues to hand her skewer after skewer. For a moment, he forgets about the imminent threat of being devoured, and he reaches out to affectionately pat her on the head. She turns to look at him, prompting him to retract his hand quickly. I can't fathom what the author was thinking when creating this tale, but I'd like a dose of that imagination. Shortly thereafter, Yang's system alerts him that his simulation system is ready. Just in time, he closes his eyes and enters his mental sanctuary, where he receives 3 talents. So inconsequential that neither the typesetter nor we could be bothered to enumerate them. He plunges into the simulations, which predict that after an extended stroll and sharing a bicycle ride near their school, a gang of thugs will begin to harass Jane. Yang remains passive, confident in Jane's ability to defend herself. This, however, infuriates her to such an extent that she ends up killing him. Once again, not the worst conclusion to a weekend outing. Yang opens his eyes as the countdown begins. Is the tense and precarious existence that his life will be from now on. He decides to run a simulation where he possesses martial arts skills on par with Jackie Chan. This time, he finally acquires a valuable combat compatibility. Jane observes Yang lost in thought and interprets his intense concentration as him gazing at her earnestly. Yang mentions that he's been pondering how Jane can consume so much food yet remain slim. Jane takes umbrage at this, defending herself by asserting that snacking doesn't count as proper eating. Snacking and eating are 2 distinct activities. After all, Noticing that it's getting late, Young proposes that they should return home. However, Jang hasn't given up on the idea of a hotel visit. As much as Young is tempted to engage in some intimate martial arts with her, the dire reminder of his predicted demise halts his desires. If Jang is adamant about not going home, then Young resolves to give her an unforgettable night. He guides her to a secluded part of town, causing Jane to grow suspicious. She had always believed all men were alike. She decides that if he gives her a chance, she will kill him. However, when she lifts her gaze, she finds that they've arrived at an internet cafe. An irritated Jane points out that she, a stunning woman, had invited him to a love hotel, yet he prefers to engage in an online game like League of Legends. With pride, Young ushers Jane into the cafe, which is filled with poorly rendered Unity models of computer setups. The shopkeeper lifts his head, puzzled by the presence of a couple at such a late hour. Only someone like Young could orchestrate something so peculiar. Jane is livid, to the point of wanting to bite someone. Taking a seat, Young asks if Jane wants to play anything. She declines, so Young shrugs it off and launches a game of Genshin Impact, revealing much about his character. Growing impatient, Jane stands up and informs him that she's going to buy a drink. Shortly after, however, Young hears cries emanating from a nearby alley. He rushes outside, recognizing the screams as Jane's. Grabbing a piece of wood, he rushes to Jane's side, finding her surrounded by a gang of thugs who resemble a Chinese rendition of the King of the Hill caste, intimidating as they might appear. Young's system reassures him that they should be relatively easy to overcome. Jane is just relieved that Young has finally stopped playing Genshin Impact. Young inspects one of the thugs and discovers he's a drug dealer with narcotics in his pocket and 3 murders to his name. In other words, just another day in Detroit. As the thugs begin to close in, Young realizes that they're under the control of Jane's zombification powers, a revelation that doesn't seem to make much sense, but, again, just take my word for it. Young adopts a fighting stance, preparing to test out his newly acquired techniques. In a sequence reminiscent of a Hollywood action movie, the men charge at Young one by one. With his makeshift staff, Young deftly fends them off. When a man who looks uncannily like an unemployed Ronald McDonald hurls knives at him, Young effortlessly parries, disarming his attacker. The last man standing is the drug dealer, but Young doesn't even bother to use his staff. He simply shoves him to the ground. Jane excitedly rushes over to Young, but he playfully chastises her with a tap on the head for her earlier mischief. After contacting the police, Young is asked by Jane to show her his phone, a test of his loyalty. After teasingly keeping it out of her reach, she ends up clinging to him like a koala. The intimate physical contact leads to mutual embarrassment, and they quickly separate. Bashfully, Young hands over his phone, allowing Jane to scrutinize it as much as she wishes. While she is preoccupied, he takes the opportunity to initiate another simulation. After acquiring some new talents, including the remarkable ability to consume an entire bowl of noodles in one go, he launches a fresh simulation. Following their altercation, he reports the incident to the authorities. One of the subdued thugs attempts to escape, but Young quickly apprehends him again, earning the gratitude of the police for his aid in capturing a notorious drug lord. While being transported to the police station, he finds himself seated next to a female officer and Jane. When an uneven patch of road causes him to accidentally bump into the officer, Jane's jealousy flares up to the point that she kills him in the simulation. You might wonder why he stays with her. A single glance at Jane reminds him she's quite charming. As the police are due to arrive any minute, he requests his phone back from Jane. She looks at him quizzically, questioning why there are no female contacts in his phone apart from family members. He confidently asserts that he only has eyes for her, hence the absence of other women in his contacts. After some playful bickering, Young returns to the alleyway to ensure the thugs are truly unconscious. In reality, he just wanted to ensure that Jane hadn't checked his browser history. He breathes a sigh of relief. There's no way he could explain why he was logged into a site whose homepage ominously warns, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." A few minutes later, the police arrive, and Jane observes that the female officer is actually a woman in her late 30s. Young ponders why Jane would feel threatened by an older woman, but he just doesn't understand. The officer's mature age is precisely what makes her appealing. Young provides a detailed account of the incident, which the officers corroborate by inspecting the scene and the unconscious thugs. Young expresses his disappointment that their first date is concluding at a police station, much to Jane's chagrin. After the officers finalize the details, they express their gratitude to Young for single-handedly dismantling a drug ring. The evidence they collected will be invaluable. A sergeant invites Young to the station to provide an official statement, but he requests to come in the next day instead, given that he's still on a date with his girlfriend. The sergeant agrees to his request but asks for his contact details. Young notices that Jane has managed to doze off in the brief time it took him to converse with the officers. He takes a quick snapshot of her, wakes her up, and informs her about their need to visit the police station the following day. Jane begins to rethink her original plan to devour Young. And rightfully so, cannibalism is indeed frowned upon. For reasons known only to her, Jane decides against killing Young. Instead, she chooses to knock him out and leave. Yang's intentions remain a mystery to her. When Yang tries to hold her hand, she asserts that she can walk perfectly fine on her own. They soon arrive at a luxurious hotel, where Yang proposes booking a VIP room so they can truly enjoy their date. Jane's eyes swirl at the prospect. However, since Yang lacks funds, he borrows from Jane, who is willing to lend him the money, albeit with the sinister intention of killing him later. As Jane is about to swipe her credit card, Yang suddenly requests 2 VIP rooms. Jane feels duped. Yang proceeds to the VIP room next to hers, wishing her a good night before closing the door. That's a true pro-gamer move indeed. Jane, feeling disgruntled, enters the room she paid for, throwing a tantrum over her thwarted plans to consume Yang. Meanwhile, Yang heaves a sigh of relief, having narrowly escaped certain death for the 3rd time that night. Jane may be attractive, but his life is dearer to him. He shuts his eyes and initiates another simulation. He gains new abilities, such as making emoticon-like facial expression and being adored by cats. The latter is arguably the most useful ability he could possess. The simulation commences. After falling asleep, Jane will enter his room, simply gaze at him, and then leave. Later, a woman knocks on his door, claiming to be from the Zombie Association, warning him that Jane is a dangerous individual who has taken dozens of lives in the past. When Yang resists, the woman believes he's under Jane's control, compelling her to restrain him. The loud noise wakes Jane from her sleep, and she confronts the woman. Yang, wanting no part in their conflict, decides to leave. However, he encounters Jane outside and meets his end. He realizes he'll need to remain in the room during their confrontation, but this doesn't address the root of the problem, Jane's intent to kill him. So he conducts more simulations and stumbles upon a fail-safe plan. If Jane wants him dead, all he needs to do is die. Of course, he isn't planning to actually die. When he sustains a lethal injury, he'll appear to die, but not truly. Having solved this conundrum, the system rewards him with an additional 5 simulation runs. A knock on the door echoes. The hall attendant brings Yang his clothes. He changes and lies down on the bed. Yang initiates a simulation. To increase his chances of success, he must run several more simulations. The simulation demonstrates that the indicated skill is extremely useful. It enables setting up an ambush for a target with a 50% chance of making them unconscious. The duration of unconsciousness depends on the target's strength. A 30-second recovery period is provided for this skill. The situation modeling begins. At 1:25 a.m., Zhao Ziasen leaves and they are escorted to the Demon Control Bureau. In the end, the modeling is successful, and Yang receives an additional +5 modeling time. Yang is very tired and out of energy, deciding to go to sleep. Later, Jane comes to his room and sees him sleeping. She sits next to him and watches his sleep. At this moment, Yang decides to roll over in his sleep, placing his hand between Jane's legs. Jane is outraged and tries to push him away, commenting on how heavy he is. Jane leaves for her room. A little later, there's a knock at the door. Yang wakes up and goes to open it. Seeing a woman as he opens the door, he assumes she is housekeeping and tells her that no service is required. The woman is furious and knocks again. Yang angrily opens the door again and states he needs no loans, new homes, or credit cards, and he doesn't intend to buy anything. As he tries to close the door, the woman blocks it with her foot. She introduces herself as Long Suzu, a special services agent. She is conducting an investigation and needs Yang's cooperation. Looking at her ID, Yang doesn't believe her and closes the door. She starts pounding on the door, but Jane, in the next room, hears it all and goes out into the corridor to see. Long Suzu forces the door open, and Jane, recognizing her, lunges into attack. Long tells Yang to run and Jane to stay. A scuffle breaks out between them. Yang, grabbing his belongings, runs from the room into the corridor. Jane is baffled. How could he just run away like that? Jane is furious, but at that moment, Long Suzu notices that her impulse strength has weakened. Yang descends to the reception on the 1st floor. The hotel administrator, having seen something strange happening on the 8th floor through the cameras, asks Yang if there are any damages or casualties. Yang replies that there are no problems yet, but one will arise after the 2 jump. He advises the administrator to evacuate the hotel residents. The administrator asks Yang for clarification on what he means by jump down. Yang leaves, reminding her once more about the evacuation. At this point, Jane and Long leap out the window, shattering the glass and landing on the ground. Jane asks Yang to come with her, but Long disagrees, striking with her katana. Long questions Jane about her treatment towards her, acting as though she doesn't notice her. She turns to Yang and tells him to follow her if he wants to live. Long grabs Yang, and they run away with Jane shouting for Long to return Yang to her. Yang asks to be heard, but Long remains unyielding. Realizing they cannot hide from Jane, Long knocks out Yang with her palm and prepares for battle. Jane, having transformed into a monster, flies into a rage. A battle commences between her and Long. Long notices that Jane has become stronger. Long sees Jane's fury and understands that only those who have just become demons, can't control their power, are in such a state. But not Jane. Jane becomes stronger and stronger, and it's visible how her power starts to crumble houses. During the battle, Long's katana breaks. It seems like she is defeated, but at that moment Xiaobai appears, a fantastical beast resembling a cat. He has come to help Long, because if Jane is not stopped in her current state, a massacre will ensue in the city and no one will survive. Long asks how to bring Jane out of her state, to which Xiaobai responds that power exhaustion should be enough for her to lose consciousness, but this hasn't happened yet. Can they defeat her?